I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so that you can see what I'm looking at. I have some slides that I'm going to go ahead and share with you. So here we go. Okay. So I will, let me just scroll up to, I'm going to try and go into full screen here so that you can see. Okay. So I titled this class today, Chesed, which I will translate in just a moment, the surprise of simultaneous self-centered and selfless acts of love and kindness, which is definitely a mouthful. But what I want to explore, actually, I'll take a step back for a moment. I'm going to stop this share. I'm going to try and go back and forth so I can see some of you as I share. Often, and I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to Ruth for a good chunk of the first part of our class. So we'll take a bird's eye view in a moment. But I want to just say first that oftentimes the Book of Ruth is looked at, I mean, not even oftentimes, a huge part of the Book of Ruth is its examples of acts of love and kindness, chesed. The word chesed is also used in the Torah, but it's used 3 times in particular in the Book of Ruth. We'll see one of them today. And what we'll do together in the series is talk about what is the chesed of each of the main characters? What is the act of love and kindness for each of the main characters? How does that impact their relationship together? And how does chesed have a transformative role in the characters, in the relationships, and in the stories? Excuse me. So I'm looking at my printouts also, so I'm going to try and multitask here. So if you'll bear with me for multitasking. I'm going to go back to my share. I'm going to share my screen again for a moment, just so I can, just so you can see what I'm seeing again. So bear with me for the technology moments here. Okay, great. And let me go into present mode. My Zoom toolbar is blocking my present mode. Okay, there we go. So what I want to share with you, oops, I don't know why I can't do that. What I want to share with you, we'll read this quote together, and it's a little bit confusing, so I'll definitely explain the wording. In commentaries on the Book of Ruth, scholars like to talk about how chesed is not just doing the right thing, not necessarily just, you know, stopping at a red light, wearing your mask when you're outside, if you're in a city that requires that, giving charity, giving tzedakah, giving some money from whatever income you make each year. It's not just sticking to the letter of the law, it's going beyond the letter of the law. So we're going to see how in the Book of Ruth, going beyond the letter of the law to do an act of love and kindness manifests itself. And I wanted to share with you, as we start, this quote from Maimonides, who dies in the early 13th century. And some of you likely heard of Maimonides, well-known jurist, a Jewish jurist, a legal scholar, and also a philosopher. So this is a quote from him where he says, "In our commentary on the sayings of the fathers," that's Pirkei Avot, Ethics of the Fathers, "we have explained the expression chesed as denoting an excess in some moral quality." Okay, I'm going to keep reading and then it'll make more sense. "It is especially used of extraordinary kindness. Loving kindness is practiced in 2 ways. First, we show kindness to those who have no claim whatever upon us. We have no obligation toward them," which is what I was saying earlier. And this is the definition that people tend to run with, that kindness, acts of love and kindness, chesed, is going beyond the letter of the law. Let me see. Oh, there we go. "Secondly, we are kind to those to whom it is due in a greater measure than is due to them." So not only do we give, do we tithe our income each year according to Jewish law, we give beyond 10% of our income. And then Maimonides concludes this small part in Guide for the Perplexed, his philosophical treatise, that's how you pronounce that word correctly. In the inspired writings, the term chesed occurs mostly in the sense of showing kindness to those who have no claim to it, whatever. So what he's saying here is that the definition that he thinks is true when you look at the Tanakh, the whole Hebrew Bible, the definition is that it's really helping people in a way, or doing something good in a way that expresses kindness, that is an expression of an act of love and kindness beyond the letter of the law, completely outside any obligation or responsibility whatsoever. So we're not going to do each slide here, but I also want to share with you another quote, just as we begin to think about these acts of love and kindness beyond what a character might be responsible for, beyond the letter of the law. I thought this was, and I am going to share with you, what I'd like to do when I teach is share with you not just my own ideas, but also I want to bring in multiple voices and then hear yours as well. So I want to read this contemporary quote also from an excellent commentary on the Book of Ruth, which I highly recommend, the JPS Torah commentary, Book of Ruth. So, and I'm just supposed to move my window here. This sense of kindness and generosity beyond the call of duty goes to the heart of Ruth. The narrative exemplifies what chesed looks like and also advances the view that chesed, when cultivated, is contagious and transformative. I love that idea that kindness, chesed, is contagious. In Ruth, chesed has a domino effect, moving the story from death and despair in the very beginning to the renewal of life and hope at the end. So we will be exploring those transformations and those contagious qualities, contagious expressions of chesed together. Sorry for them. Okay. So we are going to dive in today to the chesed in chapter 1, which is really Ruth's chesed. And we're going to examine that together. And thinking back to the title that I presented to you at the very beginning, we're going to think about, was that a complete act of selflessness, or is there something more complex there? And you can tell by the way I'm asking the question that I'm going to suggest the latter. But I want to also share with you, just for a few moments, why is Ruth read on Shavuot in the first place, which is not so easy? And also, where is Ruth in our Hebrew Bible? So we're going to just look at that for a moment. So the story of Ruth in chapter 1 mentions that it takes place, the storyline takes place between the barley and the wheat harvests, which is, as is expressed in the Torah, between Passover and Shavuot. So there's one connection. Another connection is that, as you may know, if you're a little bit familiar with the story, Ruth accepts upon herself the Israelite God and the Israelite people, and we'll see her beautiful quote in a moment. And Shavuot is a time where where our ancient rabbis added a layer to the holiday and said, not only is it a harvest festival, but it's a time of celebration for the Israelites who accepted upon themselves God and God's Torah and God's laws. So there are two connections there, an agricultural and religious or theological. And the ancient rabbis who came quite a bit later than the Torah said that Ruth was the ideal convert. There's actually no conversion in Ruth itself, in the Book of Ruth itself. There's a little bit more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more of a porous process for her. There's not this cut and dry line between her becoming from being a Moabite woman with a Moabite religion to an Israelite woman with Israelite religion. It's a little bit, there's something a little bit porous about the quality of that transformation. And we'll see a little bit about that in a moment. So I just want to show you also, in case you're like, where is this Book of Ruth in the whole Hebrew Bible? I have no idea. So in case you, just to give you some of the essentials here, Torah, prophets, and writings are the three parts of the Hebrew Bible. And we're just going to skip right to, whoops, I'm going to see if I can go back there. So this is the Ketuvim, the writings section. And by the way, you will, My Jewish Learning will send out, or you will have access to the PDFs of this afterwards. So just in case anybody was wondering that. So you can see I underlined Ruth here. Ruth is read on Shavuot, and it's among the 5 Megillot or scrolls that the ancient rabbis decided we read on the holidays. Okay, so just one more background piece in case people are curious. When does the story take place? It's set in the period of the Judges, which is around 1200 BCE. I won't go into so much detail now about exactly what was going on then, but I can give you guys my email at the end, and if you have questions about that, if you're Googling and can't figure it out, definitely email me, and I can certainly share some more and share some timelines with you that I use with my adult students. So when was the story written? Likely not at the same time as the story takes place, likely after the destruction of the first temple, the first ancient Israelite temple. And one guess is likely based on many linguistic clues and other things about the book, probably around 450 BCE, around the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, 2 key figures in the restoration of Jewish life in Judea after the destruction of the temple. And we have no idea, well, I shouldn't say we have no idea, but we don't know who wrote it. The author didn't leave his name. Some people actually think a woman wrote. It's possible that a woman wrote the book, which is very unusual in the whole Hebrew Bible and the ancient world, but it's likely that a Judean man wrote the book, an early Jewish man around 450 BCE. And we may talk a little bit about that toward the end of our time together in the 3rd session. So one of the things that's so fascinating, and I promise we'll get there in 2 minutes, maybe 3, what I want to just, in terms of a bird's eye view, so you know, Ruth is 4 chapters long. We're going to spend most of the time on numbers 1, 2, and 3 because they're so beautiful, and 4 has a lot of legalities in it, but we'll get there too. But there are, one of the things that's so interesting and complex is that there are a lot of technical or legal issues about the story, meaning, first of all, before you even read it, it's good to know that for the most part in the Torah and in the Tanakh, the Moabites, which was a nation to the east of the land of Israel. So if you picture the map of the land of Israel, it was to the east. Obviously not in the Mediterranean, but that said, the Moabites were considered for the most part an arch enemy of the Israelites, but not in every verse. And there's actually a verse in Deuteronomy that says you may not marry Moabites, and because Ruth is a Moabite, and that posed such a problem for the rabbis who were trying to better understand the Torah and the whole Hebrew Bible, the rabbis actually said that law, the prohibition against marrying a Moabite, someone from Moab, only applies to a man. So an Israelite man could, in fact, marry an Israelite woman. That's not probably the pshat, the contextual meaning of the text, but that's how the rabbis, it's how our tradition understands it. There are a few other things also. I'm only going to touch on one. The rest we'll get to in our later sessions. One is levirate marriage. So it should go without saying that in ancient times, inheritance and land was the purview of the man, the head of household, typically the man. And there was a law in the Torah, and it's a little different in Ruth, but Ruth echoes, in our first chapter, we're going to read an echo of levirate marriage, which is that levir, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, is Latin for brother-in-law. And that means that if, God forbid, a husband and a wife are married, they have no children, the husband passes away, it is the obligation, says Deuteronomy, of the brother to marry a brother of a past husband, to marry the woman in the hopes that they will have a son, and that son will actually be the son of the husband who has passed. And the purpose of that is to keep land and inheritance, and actually protects the widow also. It keeps land, the inheritance, the widow on the past husband's land and household, as part of his household. So let me stop share there. I know that was a mouthful and a lot of detail. So I want to check in. I want to pause for a moment because we're about to transition to the chapter itself and read one of the most beautiful lines in the whole Hebrew Bible, in my humble opinion. So I want to check in there and take one or two questions or reflections and see, was there anything that wasn't so clear to you and you want to get some clarification? Is there something that you have a question about or a reflection of something you wanted to just share with the group? And Julie can tell you for sure. I think you can raise your hand or type a comment if I'm not mistaken, but I'll let Julie tell you that.
That is correct. And we have two comments or questions. So I think those are the ones. Jody, you are unmuted.
Oh.
Jody? You may have to unmute yourself. I think we can hear you now, Jody. Maybe not.
Now, hi, I'm sorry.
Hi.
Actually, hi, I had raised my hand before we got started. I just did a presentation on the Book of Ruth. I wasn't meaning to share on this, but it's really good to be here, and I'll just, that's all I'll say.
Oh, great. Feel free to be in touch, Jody. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and we had another hand. We had a few more hands. We have time for Sarah. You're unmuted.
Hi. I was just a couple things. So you said that the idea that Ruth was a Moabite wasn't cool, and that and then that she but it only applies to men, we had said, you just mentioned a few minutes ago that if she was a convert, and this is, as you said, in the Judaism's first early conversion. So I had just typed into I'm sorry, I'm forgetting names anyway, so I wonder if she converted, then what's the issue? And also, related to that, is this where Judaism's, if you will, connection lies with us marrying, so to speak, into the or being with non-Jews comes into play?
Yeah. Okay. So very interesting set of questions. So tell me your name. I want to make sure
Sarah.
And Sarah, I can't see you. I don't know if you're You're not, okay,
no,
you're not on camera. Okay, oh, there you are. Okay, great.
Hi.
Okay, great. So let me respond, and let me take a step back and see if I can clarify. And if it's not totally clear, then Sarah, I'll invite you to be in touch with me also.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to share this, but I will share that I mentioned Ezra and Nehemiah.
Mm-hmm.
Ezra and Nehemiah are these figures, these men who in early Judaism, let's say in about the year 450, they helped revitalize life in Judea after the destruction of the temple. Ezra and Nehemiah are those texts, some of those chapters in their books, which are in the writings section of the Hebrew Bible, of the Tanakh. Some of those books, some of those chapters are very anti-foreigner. And in fact, Ezra, as the religious leader of the time, it says that all men who have married, Judean men who have married foreign women, those foreign women must be expelled. It's like a very upsetting chapter to read. So Judaism, scholars begin to speak about Judaism in that time period, in the Restoration time period, after some Jews return to Jerusalem and Judea to begin Jewish life in the Second Temple period. That's when we can begin to speak about Judaism. That's also when the transition to maternal, what's the word I'm looking for? Descent? Why is that not maternal? Yeah, patrilineal, matrilineal. So matrilineal descent begins in that period. There's a very dense book. I cannot say I've read the whole thing, but there's a very dense book called The Beginning of Jewishness by Shaya Cohn that examines this in great depth. And in fact, at the very end of the book, he says, I don't, you know, after like his research is like unbelievably dense and amazing. And he says, I don't know why. I don't know why in the end we had the switch from patrilineal to matrilineal descent, but that's a little bit of additional detail. But the main takeaway here is that there was the beginning of expressed written fears about intermarriage with foreigners in that time period for the first time in the Bible in a way that it hadn't been written before. Many scholars consider Ruth a polemic, an argument against intermarriage, against the anti-foreigner element, meaning Ruth, a Moabite, the arch enemy of ancient Israel, is somebody who displays unbelievable chesed, kindness, love, and models and begins a domino effect in the whole book of kindness. And in fact, we'll see at the very end, she is considered the great-grandmother of King David. And so here is this woman who, a Moabite, married into Israelite or Judean religion, ethnicity, and she is the model. So she is so much the model of kindness and love in a universal way. She becomes the great-grandmother of King David. And you know, not to give too much away in our first session together, but the whole storyline in Ruth is considered the opposite side of that argument. Anti-intermarriage, anti-marrying of foreigners. No, not anti-marrying of foreigners, says the author of the Book of Ruth. So those two things are really an argument with each other in the Hebrew Bible through the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and through the Book of Ruth. So I hope that clarifies a little bit, Sarah. You can give me like a thumbs up, a thumbs medium, or a thumbs down, so I know. Or you can say briefly. No, not so helpful? Can't tell. You're muted. Okay, so feel free to be in touch after, and I hope that was interesting to some extent for to some of you. So, okay, so let's actually, and I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay, so bear with me, technical moment. Let me just get out of this. Okay, so, and I will go into present mode here too. Okay, so I think you can all see my screen. So what we're gonna do is just kind of summarize what happens in the Book of Ruth, and then we're gonna read together the passage that I think that you might be familiar with, and we'll read it actually in Hebrew and English just to feel the Hebrew, and we'll see what we think about Ruth's act of chesed. So, and I want us to just think about these questions as we begin to make our way through the first part of the story. So what exactly is Ruth's chesed? What can we learn from it, sort of on a basic level? Is there perhaps a modern drash, an interpretive layer that we can add on to what might be a classical understanding of Ruth's chesed? And we'll have to wait and see, but for chapter 2, how does the chesed impact and transform Ruth and Naomi's relationship? Okay. So here are just how the story begins, and then we will, like I said, look at a few verses in particular. So there was a guy from Judea. His name was Elimelech. He married a woman named Naomi. They had 2 sons. You can see by their names that they're not the best names. Don't name any kids Machlon and Chilion. there was a famine where they lived in Bethlehem in Judea. And ironically, Bethlehem, Beit Lechem, means house of bread. There was a famine there. And they left and they went to Moab, southeast. And frankly, that should tell the reader, as if you are an ancient reader reading the Book of Ruth, you're probably thinking, oh, maybe that's not such a good idea. In fact, famine in the Torah is understood sometimes to be a punishment. And so maybe like leaving the lands, leaving the people, leaving your brethren isn't such a good idea. Maybe there's some introspection to be done. Or in any event, Elimelech, Naomi, their two sons, they leave. And eventually, Elimelech dies. Machlon and Chilion die. In the meantime, they had married two Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then just the ladies remain, Ruth, Orpah, and Naomi. So this all happens in just a few verses. And as you may know, Naomi tries to convince Ruth and Orpah together, return to your mother's homes. And by the way, I don't think I said at the beginning, but one of the things that I love about this book is that it's such a female-centered book, and it's so rare in the Torah to have, the main character of a story be this really, I'm looking for a different word besides special, but this really strong female character. And in fact, at the beginning of the story, when it's just the women who remain, you sort of really feel like, you almost sort of feel like when the men die and the women remain, that the narrator wants to say something through that maybe it's the women who are the favorite characters. And in fact, I think that will be the case throughout the story. So Orpah finally decides to go back to her mother's house. Oh, and I was going to say also that usually in the whole Hebrew Bible, it says father's home, but on some occasions it does say mother's home, and this is one of them. So the text then says that Ruth clung or stuck to Naomi. Vidav kaba is the Hebrew, and devek in modern Hebrew is glue. So it comes from, it's a very old word. So Ruth stuck to Naomi. And then she says this very famous line, don't urge me to leave you. Vatomer Ruth, al tifki ibi, like don't bother me, la'azvech, la'shuv me'acharayich, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I'll go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Ki asher telchi elech, uva asher talini alin. Wherever you go, I'm going to. Wherever you sleep, I'm going to be sleeping there too. Your people are my people. Your God is my God. So actually, I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment so I can see you all again. So this is really the center of chapter 1 and what sets in place the whole rest of the storyline for the chapter. So I want to this is one of those moments where I want to pause and just take maybe one or two reflections based on the following questions. Do you think that that was a full, selfless act of chesed, or is there something more complex here? And feel free to explain why. Why is this a full, complete, selfless act of chesed, and why? Or is there anything else going on here? And then we'll explore that together for the next 10 minutes or so.
Jody, you're unmuted.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm thinking that what else is going on in my research, there were several mentions of Ruth's abundance of modesty long before she showed herself to be so modest later on in this story, that she was not fond of the pagan ways of her people, that she felt more comfortable with the modesty, with the structure of Judaism as she grew to know it a little bit during her marriage. And I've imagined that she felt a natural affinity to Ruth and wanted to be accepted as a real relative. She's the first Jew by choice. and she shows extraordinary loyalty. My research also showed that Orpah and Ruth were sisters, and there's a royal line here that we hadn't mentioned yet. And in spite of that royalty, in spite of being brought, you would think, brought up like one of the chosen ones, perhaps, she rejects that. That's my takeaway from doing that research.
Okay, thank you, Jody. So that's a really interesting, Jody, thank you for sharing that commentary on the story. The ancient rabbis do see Ruth as an ideal convert, and they do attribute some additional qualities to her that aren't in the text itself. So I'm gonna share my screen again. Whoops, technical moment. Share screen, share. And I wanna just, hold on, I'll make this bigger for everyone. Okay, oh, I'll go into present mode. Okay, so as Jody said, Jody shared with us a rabbinic idea that Ruth perhaps had a specific kind of affinity for Israelite practice. And so we're gonna look at another rabbinic comment that also expresses something additionally positive about Ruth. But I want to take a moment just to look at this table together and think about what Ruth's two choices could have been. If she returns with Naomi, she could very likely experience impoverishment. And Naomi makes that fairly clear in their dialogue together, because she's going back, she doesn't know where she's gonna live, they don't know where they're gonna get food. On the other hand, if she goes back to Moab, she's likely going back to her mother's or father's house, and she will likely be taken care of there. There is an ancient midrash, a rabbinic addition to the story, that she is from royalty, and if that's the case, certainly she would be taken care of. But you can see there are so many drawbacks for her to go back with Ruth. She could be impoverished, she could be ostracized. They don't own land, and they don't know where they're going to live. Perhaps there'd be an inability to remarry. Naomi says to her in their initial dialogue, which we didn't read, but she says, like, I can't facilitate levirate marriage for you. I'm not going to have other children now. And even if I do, what are you going to do? Wait until they grow up to marry them? That's just not doable. But if she goes back to Moab, it's possible that she would have an easier time remarrying. So I wanted to show, it does, at least at this point, it does seem like there is a lot of selflessness in what she's doing. She's giving up a sense of security, most likely, and she's choosing a very uncertain path. And I'll just say very briefly, by the way, that sometimes scholars like to compare Ruth to Abraham, Ruth to Abraham, because the two of them together sort of started a journey anew. Ruth took on Israelite religion. Abraham is the first person to have faith in the Israelite God. So it's interesting to think about those two comparisons. Whoops. Okay. And here's the quote that I mentioned that reminds me of what Jody said, that the rabbis think that Ruth, was the daughter of the son of Eglon, the king of Moab, which the BT is the Babylonian Talmud, Nazir is the section, and 23b is the page. So the rabbis are kind of making the case even stronger that this was really a strong act of selflessness. Okay. However, I want to perhaps suggest something a little different. This is a quote from JPS Torah Commentary, page 22 on verse 18, where the writers say, what was Naomi's motivation? Some argue that Naomi generally wished to be free of close association with a foreigner. They conclude that Naomi here withdraws emotionally from Ruth. So Naomi really was trying to convince Ruth, don't go back with me. And yet Ruth, perhaps this challenges our notion of Ruth's selflessness, because maybe there's something else going on here. She's not reading Naomi's signals, and Naomi's like, I don't want you to come back with me. That's the subtext here. I don't want to have a Moabite woman with me. It's going to be hard enough for me to resettle in the land as a Judean woman. Having you with me is not going to work. And again, it doesn't say that in the text, but maybe that's a subtext here. That's this particular commentators, these editors, possible interpretation. So maybe there's something else going on for Ruth. And also, what I want to suggest is that Ruth isn't completely selfless. What she does, in fact, do is she makes her relationship with Naomi most important. She actually prioritizes herself. She takes care of herself by prioritizing the relationship with Ruth, with Naomi, and therefore the act of her sticking with Naomi isn't a complete act of selflessness. She also is realizing that this relationship is the most important thing she has right now, and perhaps that is a way she's taking care of herself and making the decision to go back to Judea with Naomi. So I want to read this quote with you also from a really lovely book called Reading Ruth, Contemporary Women Reclaim a Sacred Story. So Ruth is decisive, making her choice of Naomi, Naomi's people, and Naomi's God freely and courageously. Here is a journey with and a journey through empathy and caring. Ruth's faith is contextual in a relationship. So you could also take this quote and say, oh, it does sound like complete selflessness, but I am suggesting that in the dynamic of the relationship, that the chesed involved both self-care and also care of Naomi, even if Naomi didn't want it in the moment. So I'm going to suggest something a little bit further. So you may be thinking, why does she have this up here? Reading Ruth this year in particular made me think a lot about the relationship between taking care of ourselves and taking care of other people. And as you know, sometimes maybe earlier on, we heard a lot about putting that, like when you're on an airplane, they tell you to put the oxygen on yourself first and then put the oxygen on the child, perhaps sitting next to you, or take care of the person next to you. So, and I won't share right now, but psychologists, especially for, I read a couple of things about how for caretakers in particular, psychologists and, experts say you actually have to put yourself first, even though it's counterintuitive. And there seems in chesed both the possibility that we could behave with chesed, we could treat ourselves with chesed, and also at the same time treat someone else with chesed. The wearing a mask thing is interesting because we're actually counterintuitively, so perhaps chesed is something that might be counterintuitive and unexpected. Wearing a mask is something that's it's actually primarily to protect other people, as I'm sure you know, but it also protects us. And so I think there's this strange dialectic, like there's this dialogue or conversation in chesed. How much of chesed is taking care of yourself? How much of it is taking care of someone else? And you may have heard over time also that when we actually do something good for someone else, we get a kind of adrenaline rush. And I don't remember which hormones are released, or I have a quote in the slides which you could see. I think it might mention specific hormones, but there is this relationship. Taking care of others also can benefit us. When we take care of ourselves, it can help us take care of others. So when we look at Ruth's act of chesed, act of what seems like selflessness, I want to suggest perhaps in the same way that the ancient rabbi, in a different way than the ancient rabbis did, bringing in Jody's comment that Ruth did put herself first in some ways. She was drawn perhaps to Judean Israelite religion. She was drawn to the relationship. It was what she had. It was her most important relationship. Her mother-in-law was her most important relationship in the present. And she chose that relationship and Israelite religion and the Israelite people in a way that perhaps it is more complex than we think. Not just an act of total selflessness, but also an act of taking care of herself. And we'll see how in the coming second and third session, that act of chesed snowballs into other acts of both self-care and taking care of others, and how those two things are in constant dialogue with each other in the book.